Truth is, I thought it mattered. I thought that
money
mattered. But does it bollocks? Not compared to how people matter.
Welcome, mention and other fine folks, to the Sunday Dispatch of the Black Letter, where we contemplate thoughts worth thinking as we try to navigate the upside down to find greener pastures on the other side, hopefully coming out healthier, wealthier, and wiser. We're going to take a look at a little bit of gold coin news. We're going to look at debt and evictions. We're going to take a look at the housing crisis, as well as how things are really getting bad out there from a sort of macroeconomic perspective, and perhaps eventually at some point that will affect the stock markets. But of course, the stock markets don't just continue to climb higher and higher, so the wealthier can get more and more richer off of the backs of this absolute catastrophe. So let's get going. Leon Cooperman says Fed fuels a debt binge the economy can't handle. And this is Captain Obvious speaking again, although perhaps it's important because obviously people aren't getting it, at least those involved in the stock market, clearly. The Federal Reserve has created a speculative bubble that has pushed debt levels beyond what the US economy can support, Leon Cooperman said. I am uncomfortable at the present time, not because of the virus, because I'm focused on something the market isn't focused on. And that is the amount of debt that's being created. Who pays for the party when the party is over? It took the US 244 years to go from zero national debt to 21 trillion, he said. We will probably end this year with 27 trillion. That's a growth rate in debt far in excess of what the economy is growing at. And I think that's going to be a problem down the road. It's going to be a massive problem down the road. I mean, who knows how it's going to end. He goes on to talk about deflation here, but I think inflation probably is the end game. I can't see how you print out all this money without that eventually becoming an issue. We'll see, though. I mean, everything is so unusual about this, so twisted and manipulated. It's awful. We have had artificial support for the economy since 2008. I don't look at that as being a positive. Absolutely, it is. It's a disaster, really. There's another example here from Zero Hedge. It's getting worse with every shock. One bank turns apocalyptic on the coming end game. And of course, Zero Hedge like their really sort of clickbaity titles, but this is very worrying, that's for certain. In what can be described as Bank of America at its most apocalyptic, the bank's currency strategist, Athanasios Varoufakis, takes us on a tour de force where we've been going through what comes next and which culminates in what may well be the ninth circle of financial hell. He explains why nobody cares and why markets remain optimistic. The reason is MMT, in case anyone is confused, and of course we knew that. As deflation and not inflation is the risk today, central banks keep policy rates low for as long as necessary to help governments deal with the massive debts they are accumulating. Effectively, this is what markets are pricing in, as without inflation there is no budget constraint. But I think inflation is like that wild animal that you've tried to corral and manipulate with force, who then one day ends up biting you as it escapes from the pen, right? Yet stocks at all-time high does not mean the situation is sustainable. As Varoufakis writes next, things could have been different if the pandemic had found the global economy with lower debt and higher interest rates. Obviously, macro policies since the late 1990s have been loose in good times and even looser in bad times, as countries have been converging towards MMT. Eventually, these loose macro policies will likely lead to inflation. The longer it takes, the more addicted markets become to macro policy support, making the eventual adjustment harder and potentially worse, in my opinion. So is there a way out? It says it would require massive fiscal austerity and private sector deleveraging. We can only hope. This is a scenario of recurring bubbles. This will continue until unexpected shocks take place. Asset price bubbles burst, which then needs even looser macro policies to avoid an even weaker real economy, leading to new asset price bubbles. I don't believe that'll happen. I think this is the end game. This is the last stop on the train station to inflation, because I don't see this as I don't see us ever getting another chance at this. The amount of fiscal stimulus they've done, the markets will never buy this again. I don't believe. I mean, I could be wrong. I've been wrong so far about everything practically, but I mean the amount of money they've had to print, which has found its way only into the top 10%, top 1% of folks, is just astonishing. And I don't think that you'll get the same juice. It's like a heroin addict, right? The more and more heroin you give it, the addict needs more and more heroin, the more often it takes it, until eventually there's an overdose. And I think we're at this point now. I think this is the overdose, or at least certainly the next time would be the overdose, and then it's game over. But I think this could be it anyway. We will find out in time. And we all have the Fed to thank for this endless loop that eventually ends in absolute disaster. It's a long read. It's quite worthwhile. It talks about some of the issues that are happening here. We're starting to see real cracks here. The Eurozone August PMIs dropped, and the markets were disappointed by the FOMC minutes last week. So things are starting to unravel, starting to show cracks in the veneer, and it's only going to probably escalate. More than half of states are now approved for the extra $300 per week in unemployment insurance, so this is a bit of good news for those folks who need the help. It will certainly be very helpful. The majority of US states are now approved to send workers the extra $300 weekly unemployment benefit from the federal government. But because this is happening, I don't think that this is going to be any reason for Congress to really get down to work and really release the next stimulus act bill, I should say. So this is probably just going to be an excuse for them to continue to be laggards. So far, only Arizona has paid out any of the claims. Here's the states that are involved. South Dakota is the only state so far that has declined the subsidy. How much workers will actually receive depends on where they live. So far, only Kentucky and Montana are opting to give an additional $100 on top of the $300 from the federal government and the standard state unemployment payment. Workers also need to receive at least $100 a week in state benefits to be eligible for the $300 from the federal government. Eligible workers in qualifying states will receive back pay date into the week ending August the 1st when the enhanced $600 weekly unemployment benefit expired. So that's good. Folks will get potentially an extra 3 or perhaps 4 weeks by the time this rolls out of a lump sum payment, which will be helpful, I'm sure. But of course, folks, this is only $300 a week, which is half of what folks were getting before. And we knew that perhaps arguably you could make an argument that that was excessive, giving everyone $600 a week, because a lot of them were making more than they had in their jobs. And so perhaps that disincentivizes people to go back to work. I would think it would to some degree. So now they only have half of that. Still reasonable. I think these are still workable numbers for most people. But of course, it's going to be tighter this time. So they won't be able to do any frivolous spending, which I think we've seen with the prior unemployment benefits and the stimulus payment that we had. But we'll see. In other words, what I'm sort of suggesting is that this is not going to boost the economy as much as it would have done previously. And so we'll continue to see weakness. We'll continue to see more higher unemployment rates, and we'll keep an eye on Thursday to see how that's actually working out. See if we're up above 1 million new jobless claims this past week. Just a bit of a fun article here. Israeli youths unearth 1,100-year-old gold coins from Abbasid era. Youth volunteering at an archaeological dig in central Israel have found 425 gold coins that had lain buried in a clay pot or clay jar for 1,100 years. Most of the money dates back to the early Islamic period when the region was part of the Abbasid Caliphate. The coins weigh 30 ounces or 845 grams and would have been worth a huge sum when they were buried, enough to buy a luxurious home in one of the Caliphate's cities. And goes on to talk about how they found it, etc., etc. Very interesting. Just goes to show you 1,100 years ago, gold was, of course, used as real money, not like the fiat currency that we have right now, right? So here we go. Gold is money, and so is Bitcoin. At least I believe it will become like that, certainly. Debt, eviction, and hunger, millions fall back into crisis as stimulus and safety nets vanish. Without federal aid to stave off the impact of the pandemic and economic recession, households that were already on the margins are now being pushed to the brink of financial ruin. As fresh produce provides essential nutrients for Greater Boston's most vulnerable populations. This is probably from the YMCA, I guess, helping give folks some food. These are rotten tomatoes. Major recessions are especially fraught for low-income earners whose finances can veer from tenuous to dire with one missed paycheck. The $600 a week in expanded unemployment benefits and one-time $1,200 stimulus checks likely lowered the overall poverty rate. 17 million people would have dropped below the poverty line without the $500 billion in direct intervention for American families, said Zach Parolin, researcher at Columbia University. If the unemployment rate stays around 10% and no new stimulus is delivered, we can expect poverty rates to rise and climb higher than those observed in the Great Recession, Parolin said. Well, we're in the greatest depression, so I think he's got it a little bit backwards there. Roughly 29 million U.S. adults, about 12.1%, said their households sometimes or often didn't have enough to eat the preceding 7 days. Nearly 15 million renters said they were behind on rent during the same period. Just to give you a taste of really what's going on here for most folks, in the United States, those at least in the bottom half of the economic recovery, I should say. I mean, really, this is only a recovery for those who own stocks, which is perhaps the top 40, top 50%. But more importantly, this is really the closer you are, the Cantillon effect, as we've spoken about before, the closer you are to the monetary spigot, the more money you get, right? And those are the hedge banks, the hedge funds, the banks, and other banksters and folks who receive it directly. So they're doing well, paying themselves huge bonuses. As I think I've mentioned before, this inequality has never been so high since, I think, the French Revolution generally. So there's something to consider. It's a long article. You can have a read. It goes on to give you examples of people who are really hurting. There's a lot of sad stories in there, of course, as you would expect. Okay, now onto the markets, see where things are at. Probably positive again, of course, because nothing dissuades the market from continuing higher and higher. Okay, so NASDAQ is pretty much flat. S&P is also flat. I'd consider that flat. Dow Jones is down not even 25 basis points yet, not even 0.25%. So there you have it. We'll see what happens. It was an up day yesterday, and perhaps it's going to be flat today, but who knows? I mean, really, as you know, I think this market needs to lose 80% in order to get to anywhere undervalued. We'll see what happens. Until that happens, of course, or until we have a major correction, I'm not involved in this nonsense. Gold still consolidating, as you can see, and silver following its sibling gold, as you can see as well. But now below 50% year to date, around 48%. We'll see what happens. Let's take a look at Bitcoin. Perhaps Bitcoin is doing similarly, and the other cryptocurrencies. Yep, so we're down almost 3%, which is quite substantial. Market cap 370 billion, 5,878 coins available, and 24, a lot of red on the board here. You can see Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP down fairly decently over the last 7 days as well. Look at that, we're getting to double digits now. So these are definitely good buying opportunities, in my opinion. I'll be making use of them. Pretty much red across the board, as you can see. Stellar as well now, quite red. Everything looking like it's in a bloodbath, as we can see. So nothing much here to celebrate, but certainly opportunities for getting into the market if you haven't already. None of this is financial advice, just my thoughts. And now we'll finish off with the online oracle, the 8-Ball Economist, for today's most pressing question. Okay, so as we continue to see this mismanagement and this massaging of numbers and the helping of the 1% to get richer on our backs while our incomes and savings get eroded, because anyone who's going to be in this market now is a fool, and a fool and his money are quickly separated. So I thought I would ask the online oracle, the 8-Ball Economist, if we will have another correction of greater than 15% by the end of the year in stock markets. I think we're well overdue. We'll see what happens. Outlook not so good. Okay, so this online oracle seems to think that the stock markets will continue, at least if not on upwards trajectory, certainly won't see any major correction, at least by up to 15%, or greater than 15%, I should say. So we could have arguably this outlook not so good. This online oracle's input suggests that we could have a correction up to 15%, but really what we need is at least a 50, 60%, 80% correction. We'll see what happens. There you have it, folks. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate you and spending the time here. Let me know what you're doing to try and navigate through this difficult times that we have, which will probably last for another few years, I would imagine. Probably won't be on another side of this for at least a couple, 3 years. Who knows what will happen. Anyway, there you have it, folks. Thanks so much for joining me. Stay kind out there and stay healthy. Work on your debt and put away some savings if you can. Remember to be kind out there. Patience, of course, is always a good attribute. And in the meantime, remember, Dom Spiro, Sparrow.